to put out. Thank you, Joe. Our July meeting is, we're going to have
just a minute to get onto Facebook Live.
Oh, all right. Okay, you just say when.
And also don't forget about our walk coming up in October.
We're waiting until Facebook Live is recording. I'm about to do the announcements. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a first in a long time. Okay. All right, Joe, we're on, are we? Okay. I assume we're on. Looks like we are. Welcome to everyone who has joined us through Zoom and Facebook Live and our YouTube channel for this month's meeting of Autism Society of the Bluegrass. We'll introduce our speaker in a couple of minutes, but we wanted to let everyone know of a couple of upcoming events. We have a series of meetings, upcoming regular meetings, last Monday of each month with Hog Therapy Associates, and they're going to provide information on, in July, occupational therapy with Amanda Dyer. And then in September and October, they will present on physical therapy and speech therapy. In August, we're going to hear from Dr. Perez, pediatric dentist at the University of Kentucky, who works with children and youth on the autism spectrum. And that's one of the concerns that families have the most. Who is a dentist who is accustomed to working with children on the spectrum? It's one of those real dicey areas that we have to get care for our family members, but they often can't tolerate it very well. So that'll be something that a lot of people can make use of. So again, in July, we'll hear about occupational therapy with Amanda Dyer from Hog Therapy Associates. August, Dr. Perez, pediatric dentist at UK. In September and October, we'll hear about physical therapy and speech therapy. Yeah, as Melanie just said, we have we're diving back into in-person annual fundraiser. Annual, except that we didn't have it last year for obvious reasons. And we're going to try to have as well a virtual component for people who still don't feel comfortable getting out there. And also, we've learned from our meetings that a lot of people make use of that out of convenience. So we'll see how that's going to pan out. But we'll be having our only annual fundraiser Sunday, October 10th at the Whitaker Bank Ballpark, the Legends Ball Field, 2 to 5 p.m. So you can, we'll be sending out information on how you can start forming your teams. It's pretty exciting to be able to do it that way. It's a great and easy way to build up support without having to pound the pavement. These virtual ways of fundraising and building teams has really been very helpful to us, and it's fun. So everybody remember Sunday, October 10th, 2 to 5 p.m., Whitaker Bank Ballpark. More information will be forthcoming. Okay, Joe or Melanie, do you know of anything else, or Todd, that we need to announce?
I don't.
Okay, all right, well then, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker.
Yes. Technical difficulties.
All right, my battery just died. Sorry. All right, I'll do this and then I'll get my computer working again. Okay. Dr. Sarah Vanover has been working in the field of early childhood education for over 22 years and has had the opportunity to be a teacher, a director, a trainer, and a college professor for other early childhood educators. Dr. Vanover is currently the Director for the Division of Childcare for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. For the past several years, she has focused her work and research on assessing quality early childhood programs for health and safety requirements and school readiness skills. So if I've left anything out or if there's anything else important to say, and I'm sure there is, please do. And thank you for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you very
Thanks so
much. Thank you very much for the invitation. There's a few
You
things
are-
that,
No, I've turned the line down because you. There you go.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
okay. Well, there's a couple things left off of that description that are reasons why I'm here today that you might want to know about. Of course, I'm a professional in the field, but I also am the mom of an 8-year-old with autism. And I listened to several of you talk about your children's diagnosis. Along with that, I am a 42-year-old woman with epilepsy. So in our family, we have a couple of different family members that are neurodivergent and have some exceptionalities about them. And I've learned so much as a teacher. I had my master's in early childhood special ed, and I focused on special ed policy a lot. And I learned a lot of textbook information. When I became the parent of a child with autism, I learned a whole new set of information. And so that part really completes the set of knowledge to have both pieces, because I thought as a teacher, I was very knowledgeable about the process for resource and referrals, for supporting kids in the classroom. And then I had a son who needed a lot of support. And as a parent, a lot of my educational knowledge went out the window because my emotions were so involved. and so it changed a lot of things for me as far as how to support our kids and how important I feel like it is to support our kids with special needs. So Melanie reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and asked me if I'd be willing to speak. She actually reached out because in my free time, I'm an author, and there were a couple of books that she was interested in. One is this one that is on how to find quality early childcare. And this is for all kids, typical, atypical needs, whatever. But then I also had a second book that came out called Does My Child Have a Developmental Delay? This book I love. Out of all the books that I've written, this one is really special to me because it does do chapters on the resource and referral process and walks parents through, okay, I have a gut feeling something's wrong, what happens next? But every other chapter in this book is a narrative from families actually in the Lexington area who have gone through a diagnosis process, treatment, therapy, and it ranges from a story of a mom whose child is 22 and they have been doing this for a very long time, to a couple of stories in here of parents of toddlers who were just going through the referral and dealing with chronic grief and sorrow over what they thought their child's life was going to be like, and then having to readjust some expectations. And so those were really powerful stories for me to get to tell and to hear other parents go through this process. And then right after I wrote this book is about the time that I found out that my own son had a diagnosis of autism and generalized anxiety. And so I kind of went through a lot of those same things myself. And coming from a childcare perspective, working in the field of childcare a lot, we have some resources in Kentucky for children with special needs, but our kiddos that have special needs are significantly underserved throughout the state of Kentucky. And so I get questions a lot in my job on how do I deal with this? My child's been through trauma. How do I find a child care center where people know how to deal with that? My child has a physical disability. My child has an emotional, social disability. And so even parents who have a child who is typically developing often struggle with how to select childcare. Just knowing what to find, knowing what questions to ask. And so we're going to kind of start off our conversation today with that. I'm going to share my screen with you. Hopefully it is going to let me. Hold on just a second. Here we go. Can you all see this? Can you see my PowerPoint? Yay. Okay, that's good. And we'll kind of go through this, and then I'll also ask some questions if you have any as we go along. So again, hey, this is me, Dr. Sarah Vanover. I work in Frankfort, And a lot of my background has been in early childhood special ed. I taught public school preschool for kiddos with special needs, as well as I ran a childcare program in Lexington that focuses both on outpatient therapy and working with kids with special needs. And so a lot of my background has been in that field. Now, when you're looking at Kentucky, the landscape of childcare in Kentucky is kind of broken down into several different categories. The two biggest differentiations are center-based childcare or family homes. And in the past 10 to 15 years in Kentucky, we've lost a lot of family childcare homes because the childcare providers that have run these programs in their home have reached retirement age. And so there are many fewer, but we are working really hard to continue to spur that growth and encourage people to open new family childcare homes. Really, this is an issue of preference. Do you want a larger center where a child might move from room to room and have different environments as they grow and develop? Or in center-based childcare, you have a very family-oriented environment. There might be up to 6 kids, siblings can stay together. They might not be as exposed to as many germs since it's a smaller group. And a lot of times family childcare homes have more flexible hours, where centers in Kentucky are pretty much 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or maybe even shorter. Family childcare homes are really good at supporting families who have non-traditional hours, like if they work nights or weekends. Some even do overnight care if someone were to work second or third shift and need really late night support. The biggest thing that we encourage parents to look for is regulated childcare of some kind. So that means that the state does inspections on those facilities. They make sure that the caregivers, or in the case of a family childcare home, the people that live in the home with the caregivers, make sure that all the adults are background checked and have passed clean background checks. They do facility inspections to make sure that the home is safe and that children aren't at risk of getting injured based on the facility. There's mandatory reporting of child abuse that is enforced, as well as minimum health and safety standards. And so some of those would be the ratio of adult to children, just different health and safety factors that we want to see brought about to keep the best possible environment for the children. So some of the things that you also think about, the minimum requirements in Kentucky to be open as a child care program means that you're licensed or certified. Certified would be a home, licensed would be a child care. So if you go on a tour of a child care program and you ask, tell me about your program, and they say, we're licensed. That's not really an honor or, a highlight or anything. That means they are allowed to have their doors open. The state has allowed them that based on their qualifications. Now, if you're looking for quality, the program may have an accreditation. In Kentucky, we have an accreditation system called the Kentucky All-Stars. And we rate childcare programs kind of like we do a hotel system. It's a 1 to 5 star system. So if you walk into a program and they say, we're part of the Kentucky All-Star system, you would say, oh, really? How many stars do you have? And we consider high quality programs to be in the 3 to 5 star range. So that would be a state accreditation, and it is above the minimum requirements. You can also, if you're a child care program, you can also be accredited by national organizations. And one example of that is the National Association for the Education of Young Children. They're kind of like the mothership of early childhood in the US. And they have a very strenuous accreditation that many of the highest quality child care programs have. So when parents come to me and they say, I'm looking for the highest quality child care program I can find, I typically tell them, look on the NAEYC website, or look at the Kentucky All-Stars website and find a 4 or 5 star center, 3, 4, 5 star, because those are going to be some of the highest accredited programs, and they go beyond the state required minimums to be open. There are lots of questions that you can ask when you're asking questions about a child care program or you go on a website to look. Some of the most important, though, include things that relate to the health and safety of the child or the personal interaction that a child is going to get. So one of the first questions I ask parents to ask about is the adult to child ratio. There is a minimum adult to child ratio. In Kentucky, the minimum ratio for a 2-year-old classroom is 1 adult with 10 2-year-olds. That's a lot of 2-year-olds. If you're the 1 adult left alone with 10 2-year-olds, you're going to be taking care of a lot of basic needs, changing diapers, helping children in the bathroom, things like that. But you may not have as much time, I apologize, that's my dog. You may not have as much time to sit down and interact with the children. Whereas if the ratio were lower, if the center had 1 adult to 6 children in a 2-year-old room, which is the NACE requirement, then you're going to be able to spend a lot more time interacting with the children, talking to them, and having personal one-on-one conversations or developing conversations with them. Another good question is, what is the maximum classroom size? So a ratio might be 1 to 10 for a 2-year-old room, but the maximum classroom size for 2-year-olds in Kentucky is 22-year-olds. So 2 adults and 22-year-olds in 1 room. Again, that's a lot of things going on. If you have kids that have sensory needs and maybe overstimulated easily and things like that, going to the absolute maximum classroom size that is allowed in Kentucky can be very overwhelming. So it's good to find out if the program limits the maximum size and the ratio to have a smaller group that is less overwhelming for sensory experiences, and again, allows those teachers to do more personal interaction. One struggle that childcare has more than any other is staff turnover. And typically this is because it is a hard job. It is very labor intensive. You never can just sit down and take a break because your attention is always needed by the children to make sure you're keeping them healthy and safe. And at the same time, while the job is so demanding, it's not high paying. Our teachers have never gotten paid what they deserve. So because of this imbalance of pay and demands, childcare providers often turn over in a center very quickly. However, in higher quality centers, we see this less. So when you ask on a tour or over the phone, you know, how long have the teachers in this classroom been at the school? It's usually a very good sign when a teacher's had a longer tenure at the program. You know that there's something there that has made the teacher want to stay, that the teachers are being treated well, that the relationship between the families and the teachers are good. Those kinds of things really contribute. Also, that the director has a good relationship with the staff and works with them well. That's a big contributor to what would want to make a teacher stay for a longer time period at a center. Another question might be, what type of training do the teachers do? Now, some centers require that teachers have advanced degrees, maybe an associate's, bachelor's, or even a master's in the field of early childhood. But even aside from a credential or a degree, childcare providers are required to have 15 hours of professional development training every year. Some programs may do the bare minimum. They may just let the teacher take whatever. It may not be applicable to necessarily even what the teacher's doing with that age group of children. But when a director has a plan and works really hard to make sure that the teachers are trained on content that they need, then they're going to show that off. If you ask them questions and say, yes, this particular school, all my teachers are trained on how to work with kiddos with special needs, or we've all had training on positive discipline techniques instead of negative disciplinary actions. So those kinds of things are really essential when we find out if teachers are trained in the field of early childhood education. For me, one of the things I really like to ask at a high quality program, it's one thing for a teacher to have an education degree, but that education degree might be in high school education. And that's very different than working with 2, 3, and 4-year-olds who are very hands-on learners and need to experience everything instead of sitting at a table. So if somebody tells me they have experience as a teacher, they have an education degree, a lot of times I'll ask if it's in early education, because early childhood educators are trained in hands-on experiences, and play is how our youngest kiddos learn. They don't learn by sitting at a desk and listening. That's just not how a little child's body is set up to work. And so the best example to be set by the teachers are those who understand child development and know how our youngest children learn. And then another good question to ask is there an open door policy for parents? Now, during the past year, during the pandemic and COVID, visitors were really prohibited from most centers. So kind of take that out of the equation, because we were trying not to spread germs with visitors. But in general, if a center is open to having parents in and out of the building to check on things at any time, then you know that there's nothing they're hiding. They feel comfortable enough for mom or dad or grandma to show up and to see what's going on in the classroom, and they're proud of what's happening. Some centers have video cameras that a family may be able to view at the front of the building, or they may be able to log into from work to see. Other centers may have a window at the front of the classroom that the children see as a mirror that's like a one-way mirror where they can look into the room and see what's going on. The more transparency that the program allows, it usually is a benefit and a mark of quality, because they know that the work that the children are doing is worthy of showing off to people. Now, we'll warn you, some programs really discourage parents from popping in and out all the time, because we have some kids with separation anxiety that, if mom or dad shows up all the time, then it takes them like 30 to 40 minutes to readjust after they leave. So that's not a bad thing, that a center might say, please don't just pop in and visit all the time. But if the center is open for parents to come in, then that has a good sign to it. Now, before you ever select a childcare program, I encourage everybody to take a tour. Talking to somebody on the phone or looking at pictures on a website never is the same as going through on a tour. It's kind of like social media. We only put the best things on our social media pages. We want everybody to think our life is fabulous. That's what the website's going to look like too. So the pictures on the website of all the happy children, that's going to be at any childcare program. But when you go into the program and you see how the adults interact with the children, you see if children seem content, you can smell if the program is clean and that they're using appropriate cleaning measures with young children. Those things are going to make an impression on you. Other things to look for is, do the teachers make eye contact with the children and have back and forth conversations with them? And this does not start in preschool. This should be in the infant room. The teacher, while they're changing that baby's diaper on the changing table, should be looking into that baby's eyes and saying, are you having a good time? I'm changing your diaper. I can count your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and starting those two-way conversations for language development. And you will see that in the highest quality programs. Another thing to look for, what happens when a child misbehaves? Now, if you go on a tour, you're going to see a child somewhere in a child care program who is not doing what they're supposed to. This is the time when they're learning those things. So you're always going to see a situation where a teacher says, everybody line up to go to the playground, and one child runs to the opposite side of the room and hides under the coats. Or, if you're in a 1-year-old room, you may see a child bite, because that's very developmentally appropriate for that age when they're interacting. You may see a young child hit another child when they're learning how to share. The key is not to look at the interaction between the children, but to look and see how the adult handles it. Do they become very stern and raise their voice, or do they get down on the child's level and comfort the child who was hurt and redirect the child who did it, and talk to them and say, that hurts, please stop, and break it down for the age of the child and the appropriateness. We all know that kiddos are going to make mistakes and they're going to need guidance. And we want to see teachers that know how to give guidance to make it the highest quality. Another one is, do the teachers interact with kiddos on the playground? This is a pet peeve of mine when I go out to centers to inspect or to help see them, and the kids are running around on the playground and the teachers are sitting on a bench like they're taking a break. Playground is one of the easiest spots for kids to get hurt, because they can jump off of playground equipment, stuff like that. High quality programs have their teachers moving around the playground. They can see all the kids at every moment, no matter where they are. Somebody has an eye on every child, and they play with the kids. They interact with them and not just stand back, talking about what they saw on NCIS last night, or, something of that nature. So that's a good way to tell how the program does its curriculum, especially if there's ever a planned activity on the playground. If they're playing duck, duck, goose together, or they're doing some kind of outside gardening activity, those kinds of things are great to watch. And it really shows you that there was thoughtful curriculum planned. Do the adults model the behaviors they want the children to demonstrate? So to me, I've been in lots of preschool classrooms where the teachers will say, we don't sit on the tables. We don't sit, our bottoms go in the chairs. We don't sit on the tables. And then the teacher comes over and sits on top of the table while they're talking to the kids. And that kind of confusion for a young child is really hard. They're like, why can you sit on the table and I can't sit on the table? So we want to see teachers that model the behaviors they want for the kids. If it's lunchtime and they're passing around the food and family style dining, and the teachers are telling the kids they need to use a fork and spoon, is the teacher modeling how to use that and sitting at the table with them. Those are the most helpful teaching strategies, particularly for our hands-on learners, to be able to look beside and say, okay, the teacher's doing it this way, and my little brain is going to try and imitate them, because imitation learning is very important at that age. And then, do the children seem engaged with the classroom materials? So are the kids just running around the room in a circle, you know, throwing things, or are they actually participating in the activities? This would mean that the teacher has planned out curriculum and set up activities that are interesting to the children and appropriate for them. And so they're enticing the children to be a part of the classroom. And if there's a day when the kids seem uninterested and they start getting rowdy, then a quality early childhood educator will change the room around, you know, rotate new materials in, put some old stuff away for a while, change the themes and the activities to match the interests of the children, and that way motivate the children to participate in learning. So those are all things that you can get a sense of on a tour if you're looking for them. So here's some things you want to ask about when you do go for a tour, when you're talking to the director. If you are a family that needs childcare subsidy, you need to know up front if the center accepts subsidy. The state of Kentucky has a child care subsidy program for families who are in the income range and qualify, or families who are full-time students. But the program has to accept it, and not every program in the state accepts subsidy. And that's something you need to know right from the get-go, to know whether or not, because what you don't want to do is be there 3 weeks and build up a balance and then have to back pay, but still move to another center that will accept subsidy. So it needs to be one of your first questions. Another good question is to think about security. You know, how do they make sure that no child is left on the playground alone? How do they make sure the front doors stay closed at all time? Who's allowed to pick children up? Do the teachers look at that list and make sure that nobody picks the child up who's not on a pre-approved pickup list? Another good question to ask about is medication. Some centers don't want to give children medication at all on the premises. So in those cases, you would need to know if your child is on an antibiotic or something, would you need to stop by and give it to them during the day? Or would you do that before and after they're enrolled? If they do medication, then where is it stored? Who is going to give the medication out? How do they know that they're giving the right dosage? How do they document that? So that's very special, very important, especially if you have emergency medications. If you have EpiPens, seizure medication, asthma inhalers, these are really important questions to ask about how the center administers emergency medication, and if they keep a medical plan on file for the child to make sure that if the typical person who gives it, say the director gives the medication normally, but the director's on vacation, who knows how to do it next? And will they know how to administer emergency medication the correct way? Now, for children who may have special needs, the next two questions or policies are really important to ask about. The first one is about biting. A lot of our sensory kiddos are much more, they just have biting incidents at school more often. I had a biter at my house. I thought as a teacher that there was nothing worse than being the parent of the kid who got bitten. You know, those parents would be so sad when they would pick them up. But let me tell you, being the parent of the biter is also miserable. I would like sit in my car before I walked in to get my child and just stress and be like, oh no, did he bite anybody today? And it was a mess for me too. Again, I mentioned this earlier, biting is very developmentally appropriate for toddlers. If a toddler bites, we want to learn how to redirect that behavior and it not continue, but it is not unusual for a toddler to bite. Now, when a child gets to preschool, especially school age, that is not typical for a child to bite. But does the center have a specific policy? There are centers in Lexington and the surrounding areas I know of that have like a point system, and if you bite so many times, you're expelled. Or maybe if you bite twice in one day, you get sent home for the rest of that day. And those are kinds of things that can really affect a parent who has a full-time job or is a full-time student. And so it's important to ask about that up front to know what that policy would look like if you get put in that position. And the other question that is really important for parents of children with special needs to be aware of is suspension and expulsion. This has really become an issue, I'd say in the past 5 to 10 years, because many childcare programs are not equipped to support kiddos with special needs. And so when adverse behaviors begin to occur again and again and again, the program may have to consider whether or not the child is a good fit for the program. So it's important to know going in, if this childcare program has a very strict expulsion problem and my child has some strong behaviors that could be exhibited in the classroom, then there's a chance that policy in my child could, bump heads. And so we need to have that information up front to ask about. So these are some of the big challenges when you have a child with special needs and you're looking for childcare. High ratios. The more kids there are in the class, the more children that the teachers have to watch. And if your child has additional needs or needs additional support, then that can be hard on the teacher and it can be hard on the child. Safety can be an issue, but also sometimes it's just that learning activities can be an issue. So in most cases, finding a childcare program that has lower ratios is going to be the best environment for a child with any type of special needs, whether it be a medical special need, a child who's been in foster care, experienced trauma, or a child with a disability. The other thing is finding centers who have teachers that have special education training. That can be really challenging. My undergraduate degree was in early childhood education, which is considered to be a special ed degree. I took 2 classes as an undergrad on special ed, and then I student taught in part of a special ed classroom. But when I got to be a full teacher on my own, I still didn't feel like I had the knowledge and experience I needed. My first year in public school preschool, I had 17 kids in my class and 16 had IEPs. And my training seemed so minimal at that point. And a lot of our providers don't have 4-year degrees. Many of them, if they get a child development associates, which is an entry-level degree in the field, or an associate's degree, they just don't have the background. And so they need to be paired with a mentor teacher who may have more training, or they need to focus their professional development training around working with kids with special needs. For me, with my son, when I meet a new teacher, of course, now we're in elementary school, but when I meet a new teacher, I start off with a tip sheet on how to work with my child. And like, I email it to him before school even starts and says, this is his tip sheet. These are the things you need to know. These are the things he is awesome at, and they will just knock your socks off. And then these are areas that I know you're going to have a hard time with. And sometimes just training on the child can support the teacher, but also general knowledge about the diagnosis is helpful. Autism is one of those words that a lot of providers feel like they should know about. Autism, I need to know that word. A 2-hour training just does not cut it. They go and they do a 2-hour training on autism and they feel like they have a lot of background knowledge, and they could still possibly be overwhelmed. So asking initially who's had training, who's had interaction with kids with special needs, and what kind of training about my own child can I provide you? Another challenge can be safety risks. Okay, I have a runner. My child wears a GPS clip to school because when he gets anxious, he has a fight or flight reaction. And typically the fight comes out at home, which is so wonderful that he saves that for us. But at school, what usually happens is flight. And he either hides or he runs. That is one of the biggest challenges childcare providers can deal with, because if you don't know if you can keep a child safe, then that's a liability. You don't want to be the one responsible for a child getting hurt or lost. And right now, our childcare providers in the state of Kentucky are having a really hard time hiring enough staff. I mean, we're not the only industry. Restaurants are, all kinds of industries are, but childcare providers are significantly understaffed. They're working at maximum ratios until they can get enough staff. And then you put a child like mine into the classroom that will run away if he's scared. And some centers may just not feel that they have the training or support to deal with that. Which leads me to the last point on here, suspensions and expulsions. Now, most centers are not going to say you're expelled or I won't take your child because they have a special need. But they could get into the program, the child could be enrolled in the program, they see challenges develop that could lead to your child getting hurt or other children getting hurt or a teacher getting hurt or somebody getting lost. And then they think, wow, this might not be a good fit. We don't have the numbers to support this child. We don't have the training. And then that's where we see a lot of soft expulsion. It's not that the child is expelled, it's that the center sits the family down and says, I don't think this is going to work. And the family eventually withdraws the child on their own, but the center led them to that step. And I can say as a director, I've had to have that conversation. And it's terrible to say, I don't know that we have the resources that your child needs. Because I was scared for the safety of the child when a disability was really significant. And maybe that child needed one-on-one care, and a child care program can't really provide one-on-one care when you're working on those slim margins of profit and just barely keeping enough staff in place. And so those are some of the big challenges we think of with kids who have significant needs. A lot of these things are small business decisions, and this is where it gets kind of tricky. I had a parent who lived in Louisville call me at the Division of Child Care a couple of weeks ago, and her child was suspended from his child care program. And she said, but what about IDEA? And what about ADA? And aren't they required to make disability accommodations? And the fact of the matter is they're required for the building to be ADA compliant. You know, if they need to be able to have anybody with a disability access the building, but childcare programs don't get IDEA funding like public school does, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So childcare programs operate almost solely on tuition and maybe a slight bit of government reimbursement for kids who are on subsidy, whereas public schools get a lot of special education money that helps them to have paraeducators support the kids. So it's not that a program most programs don't want to expel anybody. They want the revenue, they love the families, but they just may not have the financial stream to provide the resources necessary. And that's where the soft expulsion piece comes into place, when they sit down and say, okay, as a business owner, I have to decide if I'm going to lose more business, if another child in the classroom gets hurt and families withdraw, if I'm going to lose more business, if I tell this family this isn't a good fit and they badmouth me in the community, or if I get a staff member that gets hurt in some way and I have to pay medical expenses, or, you know, what is this balance? And so they're trying to make the best business decision possible without hurting anybody. And it's hard to come to that decision. So any decision that they make in that situation is usually a brave decision, trying to figure out how to support everyone that's involved in it. Teacher training is a big part of what the center needs to do to support all kiddos. And like I said, a 2-hour training on autism doesn't cut it. This needs to be more about how to deal with challenging behaviors, ways to redirect those children, children that have special sensory needs. For me, I found it to be a lot more successful when I was a director and I trained my staff. It was a lot more successful if I had a speech pathologist come in and train the staff on challenging behaviors when a child can't communicate well, or I had an OT come in and train the staff on sensory seeking behaviors, or, you know, I had a social emotional specialist talk about kids who have a hard time interacting with peers and what are ways to do that, or what are calming techniques that we can use in the classroom. So really reaching out to specialists and having them give more in-depth information than just a training that defines a diagnosis and says, this is what it is, these are the symptoms, this is how it typically gets treated. I can read that in a book. That's important information to know. I need to know what the diagnosis is, but it's not going to help me in the classroom when I'm there with 15 kids and I have a child who is having a complete meltdown because the lights and the sound in the room is so overwhelming that they cannot function. And our specialists in the field are really the ones who can bring the best amount of training to teachers that are in the trenches doing this every day. One thing that I want to point out to you, many of you have heard of Head Start and Early Head Start. Head Start is 3 to 5-year-olds prior to starting kindergarten. And then Early Head Start is birth until they turn 3. Now, the main function of Head Start is to serve children in poverty, families that are 100% of the poverty level or below. but 10% of the slots in Head Start and Early Head Start are saved for children with disabilities. And this can be at a Head Start site, or we have independent centers throughout the state that partner with Head Start and get some of those funds. And they might have 20 Head Start slots in their facility. But if you are in Head Start, there's a no expulsion policy. Head Start does not allow you to accept funds and expel a child because of behaviors, because of any type of disability, anything like that. And they provide a huge range of wraparound services. So not only would the child get support maybe from the local school district and have the PT, the OT, the physical therapist come, but there's also typically mental health specialists, there's screenings for hearing and vision, there may be support with immunizations and doctor's visits and all kinds of things that they provide with wraparound services. And we typically think of this as a program for kiddos that live in poverty. But there is a part of those grants that are reserved just for kiddos with disabilities, and the no expulsion policy is really something that can benefit kids who have been through a lot of trauma, who have dealt with a significant disability and need to have the best amount of care. Also, one thing to consider is that Head Starts that are just a Head Start center are typically just 3 hours a day, like a half-day program, but they do have extended services in most places. Or if you go to a Head Start partnership site, which there are several in Lexington, they are usually open 6 to 6 like any other center. So it would be appropriate for full day services. And it can be a great benefit to the family. Head Start and Early Head Start, if they are licensed, also go through all of the typical background checks and health and safety measures. And Head Start, in fact, raises the bar. If Kentucky's minimum is here, Head Start says, whoa, our minimum on health and safety is way up here. So that's something to consider for families who are looking for childcare of a child with a significant disability. The other thing, of course, to consider in Kentucky is public school preschool. So kiddos qualify for public school preschool, like in Fayette County, if they're a 3-year-old diagnosed with a delay, or 4 years old with the delay, or they qualify for free or reduced lunch. And if the child qualifies, the school district, like Fayette County as a whole, would have to find a slot for them. It might not be in the neighborhood school if that's already filled, but they would have to find a spot for them within the district to make sure that they get the support services that they need, the developmental intervention. The teacher education levels are going to be really high, at least a bachelor's degree and a teacher's certificate, possibly a master's degree in early childhood education. And then you would have all the special ed supports that the public school system offers. Now with this, most of these programs are half day. So if you need full day services, that can be challenging. And school holidays are also off. Now, Melanie wanted me to mention this to you. Many of you may have seen the press release last week that Kentucky has been awarded $763 million in funds from the American Rescue Plan, specifically dedicated to childcare. And one of the things that we are doing from the Division of Childcare in partnership with the public school system is to put together some preschool partnership programs where school districts that have public school preschool will partner with childcare programs so that kiddos can get full day services. They might be in the preschool for 3 hours. Say they go to public school preschool 7:30 to 10:30 in the morning. And then the school district partners with a childcare program that would provide services the rest of the day until the family gets off work. And during that fact, since it's a partnership with the public school, the special ed services would be incorporated. Supports, the public school system can help explain the IEP needs and the strategies for support to the child care providers with the permission of the parents. And this is probably going to start January 2022 and last for 2.5 school years. So this will be a great avenue for a lot of parents who have kiddos with special needs. My son qualified for public school preschool, and we didn't take a slot for him because we both worked full time, my husband and I, and we needed full day services. So we went to private childcare, and then I paid with my insurance for him to see OT and speech outside. But having the ability to utilize the public school system services that are free, that are, part of IDEA and available for your kiddos, and then have that full day care if you need it, is just a great option. I want to talk a little bit about the Child Care Assistance Program. CCAP is the slang that we use for it. But in Kentucky, to qualify for child care subsidy, you have to be a Kentucky resident. At initial evaluation, the family has to make 160% of the federal poverty level or less. And then you would stay in the CCAP program until you hit 200% of the federal poverty level and age out. The parent or guardian must work a minimum of 20 hours per week or be a full-time student in order to qualify. If the family's not working, then they don't need child care for that purpose. One thing to consider is children with diagnosed special needs, where there's documentation that you can provide, qualify for a slightly higher rate of reimbursement. So if the center that you're going to is a little bit more expensive because of the needs of your child, that would be different. Now, this is different than a PPAC, like a pediatric medical care unit. This is going to be a typical child care setting, but there is slightly more reimbursement for a child with a disability. How to apply for CCAP. So this is done one of two ways. Well, three ways. You can do it over the phone. You can call the 1-800 number and get the application started, and then from there upload your documents online. You can apply online now at Connect, and it's KY-Nect, Kentucky Connect. It's a little gimmicky, but if you search for Connect, KYNECT online, or go to the connect.ky.gov website, then you can start the application and upload your pay documentation and everything online through that way. Or you can go to your county or local DCBS office and do everything in person. Some people would rather go and have one of the eligibility specialists work with them face-to-face. You will need to provide the correct documentation. Typically proof of income, documentation on your child, particularly if you're asking for the higher reimbursement rate because of a disability, those types of things. But you have 3 different ways to do that now. The website, a lot of people are utilizing the website, scanning and uploading those documents very easily. Once you qualify and you get all your documents in, then you get a certificate that says you're eligible for child care. You have to take that certificate and show it to the child care program that you want. Tell them you're going to enroll, but you also have to tell DCBS who you want, because we don't know who to reimburse until you tell us what center you're going to. So if you decide, hey, I'm going to go to ABC 123 child care program, then I need to go to ABC 123, show them my certificate, tell them I qualify for CCAP, make sure they take a child that utilizes subsidy. Then I also need to call DCBS or go online and finish my application by saying, my child qualifies. We are selecting ABC 123 child care program. And that's the step that a lot of parents forget, is to let us know where they're going. They're eligible, they have the certificate of eligibility, but we never connect them to a center, and the center doesn't get reimbursed. With subsidy, the center gets reimbursed one time at the end of the month. So once we have it in our system that your child is at ABC 123, then they'll attend, say, all the month of July. And then starting on August 1st, the center can bill us for all of July, and we reimburse them based on the economic status of the family. If the family is at the higher range of the qualifying, then they might have to pay a copay because they make higher wages. If they're at the lower range of qualifying, then we may be able to pay them a maximum amount, and they wouldn't have a copay. It is always important to remember that the Child Care Assistance Program does not pay the full amount for every center. Right now, Kentucky reimburses around the 40th percentile of the market rate, and that's getting ready to go up. So that means about 40 to 45% of the centers in the state, we cover the full amount of tuition. But about 60 to 55, there's going to be some overage. And so if you pick a center that has $20, that's $20 a week more expensive than what you get reimbursed, then you're responsible for paying that extra $20 a week because the center is still owed that money. So if there is an overage, always remember that you're responsible for that, and that you could still have to pay some even if you qualify for subsidy. So CCAP qualified children who are 13 and under can qualify for child care assistance. So even through middle school, if you don't feel comfortable leaving kiddos alone, particularly if they get non-traditional care, nights, weekends, that kind of thing. But if your child has a significant disability, then they can receive childcare assistance up until the age of 19. And that could be from a family childcare home or from a center that works with older kiddos. So that's also important to remember. And again, CCAP pays an additional $1 per day per child with documentation that a child has a specific childcare need due to their disability. If you don't have a job, let's say right now you're coming off unemployment, everybody's looking for jobs, there's all these signs up everywhere, you can go in and apply for CCAP and get qualified by a job search option. And you have up to 90 days that you can get full-time childcare while you search for a job. You will have to document that you're actively searching. Like, I applied at these places, I interviewed at these places. And so the state will need that documentation, but it does give you the ability to have your child in a safe environment while you are out searching for a job. And then once you get a job, you would leave the job search option and transfer based on what your salary will be at the new location. Now, you only have the job search option once within a certain time period, so you can't use it again and again, but that 90 days can be really essential for those who are looking to find a new job, particularly right now. Now, I talked to you a little bit about the book that I wrote that's on resource and referral. Many high quality childcare programs will offer developmental screenings and assessments at their centers. They may do like a one-page assessment, or they may have rather extensive screenings that they do twice a year. Public school preschool does assessments at least twice a year, and Head Start does multiple assessments as well. And basically they're looking at the areas of development, and they're trying to say, you know, are there areas that concern me that the child's not meeting typical milestones? And then the teacher can use that information from all the students to figure out how to plan curriculum. If all the kids in the class are having difficulty learning their colors, then that's obviously an area that the teacher needs to focus on. But when we look at developmental areas, it's going to be language skills, it's going to be motor skills, it will be self-help skills, independence types of things. Can I wash my hands on my own? Can I use the restroom on my own? Or am I doing okay? Toilet training, those kinds of things. And so with every skill, you know, there's a window. The milestone for walking for most kids is 12 months, but that doesn't mean every child walks at 12 months. We typically think that 9 months to 16 months is the typical range. So when we do these developmental assessments in high quality programs, we're like, okay, they're in the range, they're doing good. But if they're significantly below the normal range, then the teacher's like, oh, that's something that I probably need to talk to the parent about, and just say, I'm noticing that in this area, the child is a little bit behind on developmental skills. None of these assessments are meant to make a diagnosis. And if you ever have a child care provider diagnose your child, that is completely inappropriate for their background. You know, I have multiple degrees in education. I've got my doctorate. I am never going to diagnose a child because I'm not a diagnostician. I may have a gut feeling. I may have worked with children in the classroom for 30 years, and I can tell you, oh, I know exactly what that is. But if the provider tells you as a parent that, then they've overstepped their bounds. The provider's job is to really say, I have noticed 2 or 3 areas where the child is below the typical developmental range. And I want to let the parents know so that they can go talk to the pediatrician and say, the teacher has noticed this. When I talk to providers, I always say, it's time for you to notice. You don't diagnose, you notice. I'm noticing this. I'm noticing that. Say to the parent, are you noticing that too? If so, maybe it's time we talk to the doctor and see if they can assist. Maybe they can point you in the right direction towards something else. Sometimes it's the other end. Sometimes I'm saying, I noticed that your child talked way before everybody else, and they have a huge vocabulary, and they're so cognitive. Their thinking and problem solving skills are so high. Have you talked to the doctor about this? That might be something that at the same time is happening as, you know, we have a child with extremely high social skills and kind of low, or extremely high cognitive skills and kind of low social skills. That might be something you want to talk to the doctor about and say, hey, over here is really high and over here is really low. How is that matching up? Is there somebody that I should talk to about that? but overall, the biggest thing is to remember that the teachers are there because they are with your kiddos so many more hours during the week than you are. I mean, when my kiddos were in childcare, I dropped them off probably 45 minutes to an hour before I had to start working. And then it took me 45 minutes to an hour afterwards to pick them up. So they were there 9.5 to possibly 10 hours a day. I got to see them for an hour and a half in the morning and 2 hours at night before they fell asleep. So the teachers, they became an expert on my child too. I mean, I get my kiddos for the long haul. I'm going to know them over time. I get to spend the weekends with them. I'm the one who puts them to bed. And so I'm the ultimate expert on my kids. And all of you should always remember that you are the expert on your children. Remember that when you talk to doctors, remember that when you talk to teachers, you are the expert on your children and you should never be treated any other way. But the teachers kind of become experts on our kiddos too, because they see them in social settings that we might not. When my kids that are at home, they're just two brothers that are playing with each other and they fight with each other, but I don't see them in big group settings. Teachers see that every day. You know, I don't necessarily see them do more academic things because they've been at school all day long. So when they come home, they really just want to veg out and have some downtime, which is appropriate and they need downtime. But the teacher has seen things that I haven't. So it really takes the two of you working together to get an idea of the full picture of development. There are times when I was a young teacher when I would sit down with families and I'd be like, I'm noticing this. Are you? And they'd be like, no, never. And I thought, they're just fibbing to me. They know what's going on and they're not telling me the truth. But then after a while, I figured out, okay, I need to ask some different questions. When you take your child to a birthday party and they're in a big group of kids, do you ever see this? When you take your child to church or synagogue and they're in a group of kids, do you see this? When you're in a loud environment at the grocery store with lots of people, do you notice this? And kind of prompting parents through that, then you end up on the same page. But just remember that you each have a different set of skills that you see, and that those pools of information can help you when you combine them to figure out if a child is meeting developmental guidelines or if they need more assistance. The areas that are typically assessed in a child care program's assessment tools include motor, speech and language, cognitive skills, social emotional skills, which is so important for preschool. I think social emotional and language are probably the biggest areas we need to look at in preschool, along with self-help skills. Those are our independent skills, learning how to care for ourselves, things like that. And then our sensory development. So most of the assessments that you're going to see in a preschool setting are going to look at these different areas. Everything should not be academic focused. When you get to elementary school, there's a much more academic focus on assessments, but in early childhood, it should really be well-rounded. Motor is going to be big muscle movements. It's also going to be little movements like using a crayon and things like that. Speech and language, it's going to be if we understand the child, but a lot of it's also going to be, can they communicate their needs? If their speech is developing slowly, do they still know how to communicate, whether they're using sign language, whether they've adapted their speech to get their thoughts across? And it's a social process. So how do you begin to make those social interactions when you communicate? Cognitive skills does not need to be a child memorizing the alphabet or being quizzed on colors. A lot of times it's more problem solving. It's when we ask children how and why types of questions. You know, this is kind of for me when I see a child playing in the classroom and they're like stacking blocks up, or that, you know, and I come over and say, how are the blocks staying even though the tower is tall? What would happen if I push them over? I wonder what the bear is thinking when the little bear sits on top of the blocks. Trying to get them to think of different how and why things really opens them up to a lot of good problem solving skills that you won't see if you're just memorizing flashcards. Social emotional skills, of course, involves being social in a group, but it also is individual skills of identifying your emotions, identifying the emotions of others, learning how to cope, being able to regulate your emotions. Those are skills that in the past few years have decreased by the time kids get to kindergarten because we've pushed so hard academically. Whereas kids used to be able to go into kindergarten and be very regulated for the most part, but they might not have known their numbers and colors. Well, guess what? Kindergarten teachers went to school to learn how to teach kiddos to read, to learn their colors, those kinds of things. They can do that in a second. But our social emotional skills, that really is on us as preschool educators, because the kindergarten teachers are not going to get to reading if they are trying to teach basic social emotional skills to all the kids in the classroom, if they don't know how to follow rules, if they have a meltdown every time a small problem arises. Those are the kinds of things that are foundational to what we teach in preschool. And so we want to assess those on a regular basis to see where our kids are, because if they're behind, we want to help and intercede. Self-help skills, again, this has a lot to do with eating, toileting, hand washing, anything where the child needs to take initiative to care for themselves and their environment. And then our sensory development has a lot to do with all of our senses, our tactile senses, how we react to touch, hearing, with how we react to sound, smells. And then for those of you who are used to OT terminology, where we think about like our vestibular sense, how our body moves through space and how we feel with our body moving around in the environment. Can I handle people being close to me in a certain range? How do I react? My reflexes, those types of things are part of my sensory development. Brief on referrals and evaluations. A referral is basically saying we need more information. It never means there's a diagnosis. So if you have a child in a child care program that gets a referral, a teacher makes a referral to a special ed teacher, to First Steps, to the doctor, it's not saying your child has an issue. It's saying we need to look at this more closely. We need to find out more. With our First Steps program in Kentucky, which is early intervention and therapy from 0 to 3, and with our public school system, which takes over at 3 and goes through seniors in high school or older for children with significant disabilities. You know, a parent can make a referral, a teacher can make a referral, a doctor can make a referral with First Steps. There's a lot of different people who can make a referral, but it should be somebody who's close to the child, knows the child, has interacted with the child. When a referral is placed and we think, okay, we need more information, we need to proceed, that's when we do a full evaluation. A full evaluation is not done by child care staff. It's not done by preschool teacher staff. It is typically done by a diagnostician, a professional in the field who does very complex evaluations to make sure that they get all the details correct. And with the results, you know, we're looking for different things. The results may tell you that the child is still in the normal range, but low. That could give you an idea that this is a weak area for my child and I need to support them. The evaluation results could mean my child is significantly low in this area or in multiple areas, and we need specific help. And the doctor or the diagnostician could usually point you in that direction. With a diagnosis of autism, anywhere on the spectrum, that may mean getting an occupational therapist, speech pathologist, a behavior specialist, or a general counselor to support children. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. And then with public school, with First Steps, if the evaluation shows that there is a developmental delay, then that can help move you on to an individual education plan or an individual family service plan for First Steps, so that that child gets all the additional support and services that they need and that they are legally entitled to. So that's kind of my summary of information when you're looking for childcare, how the childcare program may assist in the referral process. I'm also open to take any questions that you have, questions on childcare and anything related to Kentucky's childcare system.
Dr. Vanover, would you repeat those titles of those books again that you showed that you wrote?
Yes,
and
okay.
Talk a little bit about them.
So
please.
This one is, Does My Child Have a Developmental Delay? And it goes through the evaluation and referral process, but it also is the one that has all the narratives of the different families. It talks about chronic sorrow and how we as parents cope as we go through this process, as well as starting the therapy process. So the subtitle is a step-by-step guide for parents on early intervention. Both of these are available on Amazon. They were published by Roman and Littlefield Publishers, so you can find them on their website too. And I think on Amazon, they also have Kindle versions of these. The other is Finding Quality Early Childcare, and it's a step-by-step guide for parents on what matters most. And again, they're really accessible on Amazon, but Roman and Littlefield is the publishing house, so you can go directly to their website.
Thank you.
Dr. Sarah, that was wonderful. And I'm wanting to say, can we have this to have all childcare providers and parents watch this? Because that you talked about some things. I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I'm really excited about the money that's coming into the state. That's a big, big deal. I hope we can figure out a way to get that out to the hills and the hollers of the state, so a lot of families can prosper and benefit from it. Because I meet a lot of families that they've had to quit their jobs or they've been laid off, and you know they really want to get their child in some other environment for childcare, you know, because they're just trying to balance life in general, kind of thing. So that was wonderful.
Well, and since I came into my job, one of the other things that we've started is we're doing quarterly TOTs, which is training of trainers. In Kentucky, we have credentialed trainers that do all the trainings for childcare providers, but we have started a training series for the trainers on topics about special needs. So in the past year, we have done, the first one was how to work with children who have anxiety and show challenging behaviors because of anxiety. The second TOT was on early intervention and the early intervention system. The third was on how to work with parents of children with special needs. We are kind of a special breed. We have learned how to really advocate for our kids, and so we can be very demanding at times. And so how to support us and work with the whole family. And then we have another one coming up in September on working with children who have epilepsy or have a seizure disorder. And we're going to be continuing those to help really, we're doing them free for the credentialed trainers in the state so that they can get the content. We're giving them the PowerPoints. We're doing all the research, then giving them the PowerPoints, the handouts, everything. And then in turn, asking them to go out and train the community.
That's awesome. Well,
So
I'm
I
sure
have a question.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Sorry. So my question is about service dogs, because that's kind of where I'm coming from. So you talked a little bit about children who have epilepsy, and I know that I know my son has epilepsy too, and I know that there are seizure alert service dogs. Where could those fit in with childcare?
By the way, we need more oranges.
Got any ideas there?
It's going to depend on how long the dog has been doing the job and how equipped the child is to be around them. Because typically, if a child has a seizure alert dog, when they're very young, they're just learning how to interact with them. So, you know, they have to kind of learn how to balance that in the classroom. There's a lot of centers that may be open to having a service dog in the center if the child knows how to interact with their service dog. Now, and that's kind of in the birth to 5 space. If you have the school age program space, I'd say centers would be more apt to work with you there because the child is older, they've learned how to interact with the dog more. But typically when you have a situation where something that new is happening, it may be that the parent has to take a day off or two and come and help train the teachers on how to interact with the service dog, because that's a very new thing for a lot of us. And depending on whether
what if a center is just not willing to, what if they're like a special center that is for special needs, but they're just not willing to work with a service dog?
Well, I mean, they have that right as a small business. You know, the business can set up the policies and decide how they want to do that. And so it could be very new to them. It may take a discussion and just say, are you willing to talk about this? Let me tell you what it's like. Some centers are allowed by the state to have domestic animals as pets in the center, or to have them in the center. So a dog being in the center is not against the state regulations. You also have to think, though, that there are other children in the center who may be afraid of dogs.
Okay,
so
but
that
that's
that
not
comes into
really
play.
a reason to deny a service dog.
No, but it's still a small business decision. So those are things that a director may think about before making a final decision.
Okay, so you're saying that it's totally fine for them to discriminate against somebody who has a service dog just because they're a childcare center?
No, I'm saying that they're a small business, and so they do have the ability to set their own policies. But it may be something that you need to sit down with the director and educate them on about why this is different than just having a pet in the center and what kind of work responsibilities that the pet may have.
Right, I'm not talking about pets, I'm talking about service dogs.
Well, yes, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. What kinds of work responsibilities the service dog may have. Because that can be very different for them. Just typically young children don't have service animals as often as adolescents and adults. So many childcare programs have never encountered that.
Okay, I have a question about the NACI accreditation. And I'm having to think back a number of years to when I was a daycare teacher, and the center where I was a good center. And they were starting the process of gaining NACI accreditation. But my recollection, one of the things that made it difficult for us as teachers, and you can tell me if it's changed, it seems like you were saying that it's different now, was that at that time, they did not have to, they could have a lower ratio, child to teacher ratio, but that they didn't have to in order to get the accreditation, and mine wasn't planning to.
NACI accreditation requires it. So NACI accreditation for preschool, it's 1 to 10. For like the 2-year-old range, it's 1 to 6. And for infant toddler, it's 1 to 4. Now with the all-star system, the higher levels, you get to pick and choose components. So there's a point system where you could have smaller ratios, but you may have state ratios, but you have health insurance benefits for your employees and several other things.
Mhm.
So a state accredited program may not always have a lower ratio, but NACI accredited programs must.
Okay, and do they typically, I'm sure they could charge more. Do they typically charge more?
I would say that programs that have lower ratios almost always charge more because they are automatically reducing the amount of income they can bring into the center.
Yeah.
By going from, like I said, with the 2-year-old room, the state says you can have 1 adult for 10 2-year-olds. NACI says you can have 1 adult for 6 2-year-olds. They're automatically losing 4 paying slots by having that accreditation. And so with that, they typically have to pay more. They typically have to charge more so they can pay their teachers still.
Okay. Do the teachers tend to make more under those?
It
Under
depends.
NACI accreditation? Yeah, okay. Thanks. I have a question. What kind of
Your
dogs do you
dog.
have?
I have a golden doodle, and
Awesome.
I'm currently at. Well, we actually selected him because we were told that was the best. That's the typical breed for an emotional support animal.
Oh,
We got it for my son with autism. But I am currently not in Lexington. I'm at my dad's cabin at Carpenter's Lake, and so
Oh,
his
cool.
dog is a Labrador, and they are not necessarily enjoying sharing the space together.
thanks. Thanks.
I would love to meet your dog sometime.
He's a sweetie.
I love your dog.
Big fan, big dog fan over here. Okay.
I have a question. How can we get more child care centers to be able to provide appropriate programs and supports for kids that would fall under the autism spectrum disorder? You know, would that require, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking through your whole last talk and financially, but then also what my experience was, and it was a long time ago with our son, but it was just like I had to be able to pay additional money or figure out a way to make the center accept my child. And that for some families, that is so you know, that's not a possibility, especially as we go to the eastern part of the state where there might not be as many resources and whatnot. And what I'm learning is that some of these kids are being mistreated in some of these centers. And so it seems like it's a big conundrum, you know, but the incidence rate, well, you know, it's better than me, Dr. Sarah, is that the numbers are just climbing, and we need appropriate places for these kids to be able to go and be safe and have a positive experience and learn.
The biggest challenge we have in the field of childcare right now is the wages we pay the teachers. And this is a nationwide problem. And the pandemic has really brought that to light. And so a lot of the funds that we're getting infused into the state from the feds right now we're supposed to use them to stimulate wages. Because if we can get higher wages, then we can get higher trained professionals to come into the centers. And then if they're making good wages, they're more likely to stay. And so all of this really goes down to funding in a lot of ways, because childcare programs really receive very little outside funding. You may have a few children on subsidy and get some money for that, but in general, in Kentucky, 17% of the capacity slots for the state are funded by subsidy. So that means 83% of the slots are funded by parents. And when centers are barely making enough to pay their bills, they're not going to have extra staff members that can support a room to lower the ratio or to support children who may have additional needs. And like my son is a perfect example. I told you he's a runner. That's one of the scariest things for centers, because if you have the minimum amount of staff to be in a room and a child runs and is out the door, you're in trouble if you have a staff member leave that group. You're in trouble if you have a child alone. And I actually remember when Melanie's kids were little, and I think she had some of the same struggles with hers. And that's one of the reasons I went and got a GPS clip for my son, is I was so scared he would get lost if he bolted out of the building. But, you know, those are liability risks that small businesses are scared of. But if we can stimulate those wages and get more trained professionals in, and even have somebody who floats to support extra classrooms, that's going to be where kids with disabilities are going to have the more support and more access. Now, almost every county in the state every county in the state has access to Head Start, and almost every county in the state has access to Early Head Start. Most people have access to the public school preschool system in some way. Private childcare is harder to find in 50% of our counties. There are some areas where the Head Start system and the public school preschool system are the only options. And they do serve kiddos with disabilities, but it might not be full day, or there might not be enough spots in a Head Start program if only 10% are dedicated to that. Another big issue for me is training teachers, and just as much knowledge on strategies, not just definitions, but if we can give teachers access to strategies on how to support these kids, then it's less stressful for them. Because when a teacher's stress level escalates, that's when you see those abuse cases. I mean, you all know the data on abuse for kids with disabilities. It's like 4 times more likely. And that's because as a parent, as a child care provider, as a teacher, you're pushed to the brink sometimes with these challenging behaviors. But if we can lower a teacher's stress level, then those cases of abuse are much less likely to happen. And that's typically going to come with hands-on training and giving them strategies to implement in the classroom, not definitions.
That's an excellent point. I hope that you would reach out to the collective wisdom of the Autism Society. This is a plug of the Bluegrass, because we have amazing parents that have had, you know, different kinds of experience and have a lot of wisdom. And I guess I'm really proud of our group, because I've met some pretty amazing moms and dads and grandparents and uncles and aunts that care about, you know, their loved ones. And if there's ever a need, I hear I'm volunteering everybody, Sarah, I'm sorry, but you know, but if there's ever a need, I would hope that you all would think of us as some kind of partner, because I think the wisdom that comes from this group of people is pretty phenomenal.
Agreed.
Well, and I told you, you know, I thought I had all this knowledge when I was an early childhood special ed teacher. Then I had a child diagnosed with autism, and it's like, whoa, I was giving parents all this information, like just do this and do this and do this, and it'll work out fine. And the first year that we went through the evaluation process, just waiting to find a diagnostician that could diagnose my child. To, you know, everybody was like 13 to 14 months wait list just to diagnose. And moving through this process, and we think, you know, parents have to deal with so much more stress than we anticipate as a teacher. We don't see all the behind the scenes stress that they go through. And it, you know, I saw this meme when we were going through all this process that said a nervous mom can do better research than the FBI. And I thought, I now know the name of every child psychiatrist in the state of Kentucky. I looked them all up because I was trying to find somebody who could get me in as soon as possible. And it's true, our parents just have this wealth of knowledge because they have done in the field research. And most of our teachers get in the book research, and they're great as a combo, but teachers cannot support the kids with just in the book research.
We have a question in the chat. It says, can someone ask about access to childcare for older kids with disabilities? How does anyone access those services, and what programs exist in Central Kentucky?
It depends on what you're looking for, whether it's after school or full day. Like there are middle schools in Kentucky that have after school programs that you could utilize if a child is enrolled in the public school system and you need that extended care. A lot of our kids who are older, beyond the 12 and 13-year-old range, usually use family child care homes because they don't want to be in a program with much younger kids, or they need a smaller environment. So a lot of those are certified family child care homes. If you go to the Kentucky Connect site, that KY Next, there is a search engine on there for child care programs throughout the state. You can search by county, by zip code. When you search by a certain zip code, it pulls up all the centers by the star rating. So 5-star programs first, then 4-star, then 3-star, then 2-star. So it tells you the quality. And you can also see on there the contact information from the centers, the investigations and reviews the centers have had are on there. So if you want to know if the center's ever been in trouble for something, or if they've ever had previous charges filed against them for mistreatment, things like that, you can read all that. But that search tool gives you an idea of what age ranges they serve, because it marks on there infant, toddler, preschool, school age, those types of things. But I will say a lot of our older children between that 13 and 19-year-old range either are in after school programs through their middle schools, or maybe in family child care homes where they know the child care provider very well and is more of a family-based setting. You're muted, Joe. It looks like you're
Sorry,
talking.
there's another question. Can you share the list of child psychologists?
I don't know if it's still accurate compared to what I looked up 2.5 to 3 years ago, but I did a lot of those through, I searched through the American Academy of Pediatrics online, and I called all kinds of people. I called Melanie, I called Kentucky Spin, I called about every professional organization in the state and asked for everybody that I could find. And I found out that almost 50% of those people are cash only, because they have so many people that need their spots, they don't even have to deal with insurance. So it definitely, we need more. That there is definitely a shortage in Kentucky. I think Tal Curry also helped me get a lot of those names, because I've worked with Tal at DCBS for a long time, and before he moved on to the Kentucky Autism Center.
What is, okay, I really feel like the US should move to what other countries have and heavily subsidize childcare. And because I think it's in everyone's interest on a whole number of levels. So this new infusion of money that's going to happen, it sounds to me like the closest, and it still may be really far away, the closest we've ever come to even considering going that direction. What do you think about that? Do you think it's possible that it's going to move things closer to that, or at least not fully subsidized, but partially?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I know that Biden is continuing to talk about childcare as part of the infrastructure package. And so, if this is a one-time infusion, it's awesome, but it's all going to be done in 2.5 years. And we have to spend the money by the end of 2.5 years. And so that limits, people don't want to give their staff a wage increase for 2.5 years and then cut their wages after that because they don't have anything else to support them. They don't, if we increase everybody's subsidy with part of this money, we don't want to have to increase rates again in 2.5 years. So it's definitely, there's going to be a huge portion of it. $490 million was designated to go to payments to childcare programs to help them sustain as we rebuild after the pandemic. So the vast majority of it is going to keep childcare in business in Kentucky, which is fabulous. And then the other portion is projects like the Preschool Partnership and training academies for childcare providers and scholarships for them to get further education, those types of things. But ultimately, there's going to have to be more subsidy than a one-time deal in order to make that switch like you're seeing in other places. And there are states that have already done public-private partnerships for childcare. Georgia's got a system that they've used that. And, the public school preschool couldn't offer universal preschool by itself. There's not enough space throughout the state. There's not enough teachers. They have to partner with high quality centers and kind of offer both, just if nothing else for the space, but also because we don't want to bankrupt all the childcare programs and lose all the infant toddler slots throughout the state. So there are models of ways that we could move forward if we get continuing funding through infrastructure and through state support, or even business communities that pitch in, because there are businesses like Toyota that subsidize their employees' childcare so that they know their employees show up for work. If we have combinations of those types of funding where we have, business support, state funding, federal funding, and some parent funds, but not as the main portion of it, then we could see a highly subsidized model long term, but we're still quite a ways off.
Thanks.
We have another question in the chat. It says, is there still a wait list for CCAP funds, and is that regional or statewide?
There is no wait list in any place in Kentucky for CCAP. If you qualify, you can start as soon as you get your certificate. In fact, numbers dropped during the pandemic because a lot of families lost jobs and you had to work a minimum hours to get CCAP. So right now we're really trying to get families to come back in and reapply as they're starting new jobs and re-entering the workforce.
And if you have a child with a disability, do you get a higher rate of CCAP funds?
But you have to have proof that their developmental disability requires that additional support or that specific type of child care. So if you have a child who's diagnosed with autism, like I always take my child's paperwork from the diagnosis that kind of says that. And then I have a letter from my doctor that says, because of his disability, he requires an environment with, smaller groups and less noise and less stimulation and that kind of stuff. And, that would help document that process. Is there an effort towards an autism certification for childcare providers? Not at this point. Right now in Kentucky, we have a credential for directors, and we're looking at creating a new infant toddler credential. But like I said, we are doing these training academies, and we're really trying to put an emphasis on an increased amount of training throughout the state for child care providers to work with kids with special needs, which has not been in place before. And we're hoping that we can address a lot of this in depth if we train all of our trainers in every region of the state, and they're out there with this information, and we kind of spread that throughout the state, then hopefully the training patterns of our child care providers will increase and have a lot more information about strategies to benefit those kiddos.
Okay. If anyone else has more questions to put up in either chat on Zoom or Facebook Live, go ahead. And if anybody live here has a question, feel free to jump in. I'll ask one thing. Where's Carpenter's Lake?
It's about 15 minutes away from Owensboro.
Ooh, wow. That's cool. Very cool. Is that where you're from? That
I grew
area?
I grew up in Owensboro, yes.
Yeah. I'm hearing it's gotten really much improved over, like their downtown is really cool. And,
Oh, they have the best playground in like the whole world. In fact,
wow.
there were it was rated higher on this like national assessment of playgrounds than ones in Tokyo, Japan, and all these huge big cities. It's just, if you haven't ever been to Owensboro, you need to bring young children to Owensboro just to go to the playground by the river.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I had not heard about that. I've just heard about like the shops and the restaurants and stuff, the scene down by the river, right?
We
Yeah.
have another question in the chat. It says, can CCAP funds be used to provide in-home care for older kids with a disability, and how does that work?
Well, there's different kinds of family child care providers. A certified provider works in their home only, and they typically serve up to 6 kids, but you can be a registered provider and serve children in their own home. A registered provider is what we typically call family, friend, or neighbor care. So a lot of times in Kentucky, it might be a grandmother getting certified to be a registered provider so she can care for her grandchild. She would get the income from their subsidy, and then the parent or guardian of that child would be able to work outside the home. So you don't get reimbursed as much as a registered provider, but you also can care for that child in their home if you need to. It could be somebody related to the child. It could be a neighbor down the street. And so that would work for an older child as well, as a certified home where multiple children go to the provider's home. Registered providers, everybody's rates are getting ready to go up. Starting on Thursday, everybody's rates will increase $2 per child per day. So I think that registered providers get reimbursed around $12 a day, which is less than, you know, our center-based care and our certified homes, but it is the $2 jump will be significant for them percentage-wise.
I see that there's a new question. Is there a registry for registered providers?
You need to call the Division of Child Care to get the paperwork to be a registered provider. We have about 60 of those statewide, and they don't go on the website for a search because they usually are not open to serving lots of other people's children. You have a max of 3 kids that you can serve in the home as a registered provider. But like I said, for the most part, it's like an aunt or a grandmother or somebody caring for a child that's related to them. So they're not really opening it up to the whole world. But the registered providers stay on file at DCC and they're not in the search engine. Certified providers, which are family child care homes also, those are in the search engine.
Okay. That $12 a day reimbursement, that's through the state?
Yeah, the child care assistance program is all through the state. So whether you're at a center or a family child care home, the provider will document how many days they watch the child, send it to us, and then we reimburse the provider directly. The money doesn't go to the family themselves. The family typically works with the DCBS local offices and the eligibility specialists to qualify, and then my office reimburses the providers.
Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any more questions in either of the chats? All right. If nobody else does, you do have a couple of seconds before we end. Feel free to throw it into the chat or ask live. But Dr. Vanover, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. You took some of your vacation time to join us.
That's all good. I've known Melanie a long time. When she asked me, I was more than willing. I was watching her kids in childcare, so we go back a really long time.
Wow.
I was
That
only
would you really
I was
do.
only 9 at the time. Would it be okay if we put a link to your books on the when we send them from, I think that'd be neat to share that with families.
Yeah.
you know.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
you're
That
more
would
than
be
welcome
nice.
to.
Yeah, so Melanie, you're talking about Joe putting them up on the YouTube channel. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I mean, like, when you send out the notice, here's the information and the YouTube, then maybe just attach it to that email, if that would be possible.
Yeah, I wish I had a chance to type those into this chat before too late, but anyway, they do look like awesome resources.
Yeah.
Well, and if you go to my website is really easy. It's sarahvanover.com. Just spell it out. There's an H at the end of Sarah. But one of the tabs of my website has a link to all 6 of my books. But only 2 of those are focused towards parents.
There you go. I typed it in. You can spell check me there.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I am interested to hear that you included a grief portion in the book about the diagnosis, because I didn't need, strangely, I didn't need help finding the diagnosis, because I did have those people say, it was a pediatrician say, oh, I think he's late talking. You should go to a speech pathologist to have that checked out. And that, I mean, and by the way, that what you were discussing about teachers saying, I noticed this and that, I am in favor of that entirely, because we as autism parents often hear of people who have trouble getting a doctor to give them the diagnosis. And for a long time, I've thought that they and others were just timid about it. It's a hard piece of information to give a parent. But the way it happened for us, I entirely endorse. We had a pediatrician say, oh, I think his speech is delayed, and so you might want to go to a speech pathologist. And so we did, and they agreed and said, I think you should take him to have an evaluation. And so none of them, until we got to the point of evaluation, had to say the awful thing, and so we did get passed along. We did get all that. But even so, we were still just stunned, and we were for many days just in a dark place. So it's universal, I guess,
Well, and when I wrote the book, I reached out to Dr. Leroux at UK and asked him if he would read it and endorse it for me. And the first thing he said was, I love the fact that you have a chapter on chronic sorrow, because that's such an issue for so many parents. And, it depends. I was really lucky. I knew that my child was having some issues. I thought he had an ODD. I felt like he was being so defiant, and I was like, I'm gonna pull my hair out. You're driving me crazy. But my sister, who's a licensed counselor, sat me down. She goes, Sarah, I think he's on the spectrum. I'm like, you're nuts. That's not it. I said, he's just being ornery, and we'll go to a counselor and it'll be fine. And she sat down and she goes, now I want you to look at all this stuff and think about it from your teacher point of view and not your mom point of view. And I was like, oh my gosh. So by the time I was getting appointments for evaluations, I knew what I just needed a diagnosis so that I could get the OT I needed through my insurance, and I could get this and this. And so when the counselor sat me down and said, okay, I'm diagnosing him with level 1 autism. And she's like, how do you feel about that? I'm like, I'm fine. I need to go to talk to my health insurance company now. Because, I had come to grips with it, because the behaviors that we were seeing were so overwhelming. I just needed to know what it was for sure, so that I could start treatment. But I had all this training in special ed. My husband dealt with it a lot differently. He is a teacher, but not a special ed teacher. And watching how the two of us reacted differently was very unique. And then I had a lot of guilt too, because I also have a disability that is a neurodivergent disability. I'm thinking, did my epilepsy cause him to have autism? Could that all be linked? How does that work? But we second guess ourselves so much during that process, and we go through so many things. I thought this would happen. I thought this would happen. parents have to take care of their own emotional health too. And for the most part, they don't. They're so focused on their children.
Good point. And I will say that there's a much higher percentage of epilepsy in individuals with autism than in the general population. So it happens, no matter, all of it just happens. He could end up having some of that as well on top of everything else. But I've never heard that anybody with autism epilepsy is more likely to have a child with autism. Have you heard anything like that? I've never heard that. So you just decided to put that on yourself.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, why not? You're heaping all the other guilt on. You
Good
might
idea.
as well add that. But, it's just a lot of the things we think about, because I know people who their child has been diagnosed with this disability, and they're like, well, was it because of what I ate while I was pregnant?
Yeah,
was
sure.
it because of where I went? Was it because of this? I took anticonvulsant drugs the whole time I was pregnant with both my boys. So did that affect it? And all of us, we go through these thought process thinking somehow it's mine, somehow it's my fault. I bear this burden as a parent. And really what we need to do is, stop getting stuck in our guilt and start working on our plan to support our kiddo and for our own positive mental health. And if nothing else, in the past year and a half with the pandemic, it has taught me that my own mental health is important, because taking a kiddo with autism and having him in school, then pulling him out for a year and a half, then going back for 3 months, and then going back to our home for the summer. I was I've never in my life been upset that summer break was coming. And I'm like, we just got into a routine and now we've got summer break and this is killing me. And all of it has pushed me to the edge so far that it made me to, it forced me to the point where I had to think about my own mental health as a parent of a child with special needs. Whereas before I really just wanted to focus on my son and be super mom and fix this somehow. So all of us deal with that, but there aren't very many books that address it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Lissa suggests that you owe your amazing prolific writing to your neurodivergence.
It is a possibility. I like to be able, when I do talks on epilepsy, I just celebrated my 7-year anniversary of being seizure free, which was the longest I've ever gone without a seizure. I was very excited. And I often, when I talk to students, college students or stuff, they'll ask me questions about, I thought epilepsy was a brain disorder. How, I didn't think you would be able to have a doctorate or do those kinds of things if you have something wrong with your brain. And so a lot of the misconceptions we hear, I love to prove those wrong.
That's shocking. I didn't know that people looked at it that way. It's the kind of thing you wouldn't know until you're in your shoes, and then you start hearing it from people. I didn't know that people did that. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume that we don't have any more questions from our audience, but do know, Dr. Vanover, that we end up with so many people viewing this later on our YouTube channel. And we have and to everybody who's watching tonight, we do know that we have a really fine YouTube channel, and our wonderful Joe Grayson pretty soon after our meetings are over gets them uploaded. And so we have a fairly large library there. It's covering a few years now. And whenever we have a speaker who allows us to record, we put it up into our YouTube library, and you can just go back, and you can even just put in probably a search there and find whatever kind of topic you're interested in. But that's really a great resource that we're glad to have now. And on top of that, we're now meeting virtually, and I think that's something everyone should know. We intend to continue even when we're back in person, and we still don't have a timeline on when that will be, because our meeting location is still not open to the public, still not open to in-person attendance. So I'll remind everyone that our meeting in July is going to be about occupational therapy, and we will have Amanda Dyer of Hogg Therapy Associates. August, we're going to hear from a pediatric dentist. In September and October, we will learn about physical therapy and speech therapy. So, very importantly, more information will be coming out soon but we are going to have an in-person fundraiser. Our only annual fundraiser is our Bluegrass Autism Walk. And this year we're going to be back at the Legends Whitaker Bank Ballpark, and it's going to be Sunday, October 10th, 2 to 5 p.m. Just look for more information to come. And then we'll have the online platform up through which you can assemble your teams, name your teams. You can do whatever. You can personalize it. So, all right. If no one else has anything, thank you so much, Dr. Vanover. I thought it was just great, fun information. We appreciate it. Okay. Well, with that, we'll go ahead and let everyone go. You can go back to your vacation. Go jump in that lake. I'm imagining it's out that window behind you, that there's like a diving board over a lake.
Well, the pool is that way and the